going live. Hello, welcome along to Live on Air tonight. I've got Barbara Moller in Wellington. She's just away changing her glasses, and here we are. She's back in. Welcome back, Barbara.
Thank you, David.
And we've got Dorothy Willis down in Riverton, and the three of us are going to try and understand miracles from a biblical, theological, pastoral perspective. And we've each got very different ideas and perceptions about miracles. So to start the evening off, I'm going to bring up our slide share, and this is what we will be looking at tonight. We've got 5 topics that we want to share, and these topics are the miracles, the nature miracles in the Bible, the physical healing miracles in the Bible, the healings of the mind or the soul in the Bible. Then we move to people other than Jesus doing the healing, and that may be biblical people, and then we bring it into the modern day with some alleged miracles of healing. So we're going to cover quite a broad spectrum and spend about 10 or so minutes on each of these issues. Now I see that we've got 5 concurrent viewers with us, so before I do anything else I should say to the viewers, if you look for the little button Q&A and click on it, as we're going through you can ask your question, and when we answer it I will highlight that it's being answered, and that timestamps it in the recorded video. So I just wondered whether it would be a good thing to ask, first of all, Barbara, just a couple of brief words about yourself. Barbara, what parish you're in, and whether you're a minister, a lay preacher, whatever.
All right, David, thank you. Yes, I'm a lay preacher at Wesley in Upper Hutt, and it's the Uniting Parish. I also preach at Iona, which is our other parish. It was part of the whole parish. And I'm sort of semi-retired. I was a credit control accounting person for many years, and I'm now able to visit people if they're sick. I have a mother in a home not far away, so I'm often down there and often help with some of the people there, particularly feeding. And I've got brothers in the North Island and my own children. I've got 2 daughters and 2 grandchildren. They live in Australia on the Gold Coast, and the eldest one is in Melbourne, so I don't see them very often.
Barbara has been a long-time member in the Hutt City Uniting congregations, and is a very avid follower of Live on Air, and has been on with us at least once before, possibly twice. And I'll swap over to Dorothy. Dorothy also is an avid Live on Air presenter. You've done a couple with me, I think, Dorothy.
Yeah.
Would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Oh, yes, Dorothy Willis, right down in the deep south in Riverton. We have team ministry down here, local shared ministry down here, so all our folk are quite busy. I've had an interest in lay preaching for many years, and have been quite widely used around the Southland area in a lot of rural parishes, which has been marvellous experiences. Just 3 adult children, all with and some grandchildren, and a little dog that's the pride and joy of my life.
That's wonderful. Now, Dorothy's home in Riverton is virtually literally right on the banks of the estuary of it's just a marvelous place to be. I can't describe the actual. Oh, how would you say it? It's just panoramic views in every direction across the estuary and the river and the rural heartland, if you like, of around Riverton. Fantastic place. Okay, Well, without any further ado, I'm going to go back to our slide share, and we're going to just have a look at, first of all, the nature miracles in the Bible. Now, the nature miracles are those ones where Christ appears to perform miracles around physical events. The obvious one that starts in John's Gospel is turning water into wine. And I'm going to actually put Barbara and Dorothy on the spot as lay preachers. They're not going to ask me this question. I'm going to ask them. What do you make of the nature miracles, such as water into wine, or Christ walks on the water, or calms the storm? How do you interpret that, and what does it mean to you?
Well, for me, it means that you need great faith to believe that these things will happen or have happened. And it's a wonderful witness to the people who don't have very much faith. And I know that God certainly is a modern day God of miracles, and I've seen quite a few miracles happening in my own life.
Okay, thank you. Dorothy, what do you have to say about the nature miracles?
Well, it seems to me that Jesus always firstly responded to need. Whatever that need was, whether it was around the nature miracles or anything else, his first response was to respond to that immediate need in the situation he was in. And it also seems to me that there was a sense in which there had to be a difference in what Jesus was able to do above the ordinary Joe Bloggs he was mixing with, for him to be able to say and make a statement of who he was.
Okay, here's my perspective on it, which is a little bit different from yours, and I'd very much like anyone in the audience to feed a comment or a question through. Let's take the one of Christ stills the storm, and there's a very nice image here that comes from the late 19th century, and you've got that sort of figure of light on the stormy seas of Galilee coming through, and the disciples are quite clearly in awe of what they see. Now, to me, this has always seemed much more like a metaphor that no matter what the storms of life are, Christ can come, as Dorothy says, to meet the need. It doesn't require Jesus to physically walk on water to do this. That's just, in my opinion, and I could be quite wrong about this, that's just a metaphorical way of, pardon me, speaking about it. So Max Thompson's got a question here, which I'm just selecting now, Max, and we'll take it. Each of us can answer this question. Max is asking us, are we convinced that the gospel writers were certain that the miracles happened as recorded? Let me just rephrase that. Max is saying, do we think that the gospel is being accurate when it records the miracles? So what do you think on that particular question?
I think it's very hard for us to either prove or disprove that either way, because of the difficulty in understanding how language was expressed back then as compared to now.
I think that's a reasonable kind of answer, because the biblical world, particularly the world around Galilee, has a very different world view to the world view that we've got today. And in fact, the basis for how I look at all the miracles, but particularly the nature miracles, is that their worldview is so different, I can't be convinced by apparently Christ walking on water, because what the Gospels are trying to record here may be something different from what I mean by walking on water, which is defying gravity. Any comments, Barbara?
Yes, I agree with you both, because we do think differently now in our time to what they did way back in Jesus's time. And also I think Jesus, as you said, Dorothy, these things happen when there's a need, and I can vouch that with you, because every time there is a need and we have to do something about it as Christians, and then we see wonderful answers in other people's lives.
Okay, just thinking, Max, have we answered that question for you? I suspect that we're all convinced that the gospel writers were certain they were writing something they wanted to communicate about Jesus. I'm not so sure that we can say that they were trying to record factual events. They were trying to record something about this figure of the person they called the risen Christ by the time you've got some of the miracles occurring, such as eating breakfast on the shores of the lake. That kind of miracle is a different kind of miracle, I think, from some of the other miracles. And the other miracles are even more interesting in terms of what's being portrayed. So I'm going to conclude that particular question, Max, and I'm going to bring up our screen share, because the next screen share is about miracles of healing, such as when Christ heals a paralyzed man at the pools of Bethesda. Now, the pools of Bethesda, I think, are absolutely incredible, placed from a historical perspective these days. But what comments do you have to make about Bethesda? Do you see people like paralytic people, blind people being healed today?
Well, no, that's something that, yeah, is probably not happening today like it has been recorded back in New Testament times.
Yes,
You think it's stopped?
I was going to say, these days you'd only see it at a Pacific service, for example, a healing service. We don't see it through our normal worship services in our churches these days.
Okay, that's an interesting comment from, let's pick up Barbara's comment there, and I wonder why we don't see healing services, healings in services as a normal course of events. Have either of you got a perspective on that? Why wouldn't we see those things going on today?
Well, sometimes it's psychological. You know, something in the mind, and we don't see any result for that. You may see it later on if you know the person very well, but if you go to a healing service and they've got a psychological problem, you obviously might not see any results at that time.
Okay, we will come to the psychological healings, but I want to stick in some ways with the physical healings right now, because there are, I think, some very, very interesting odd healing events that have happened that aren't really in the normal swim of events, if you like. One of the most famous in recent times was in Sydney at a pardon me, at I think a Pentecostal service. I'm not 100% sure on that, but a woman who was blind began to see, and the medical examination of the person in question certainly suggested that something had occurred that overcame her blindness, and she was seeing in a very physical sense. Now, that made the front page of the New Zealand Herald. I think it also made the front page of the Sydney Herald. And then more recently, this is not an example of a healing service, but it's an example of something that occurred, which was very strange. The New Zealand Herald also reported about a woman who was blind, and she was out jogging, being led by her guide dog, and she somehow stumbled and fell and hit her head, and in that collision regained her sight. So all I'm suggesting here is that sometimes in the world of medicine, in the world of healing, there may be effects that we call miracle that go on. We don't know whether they're in the same line as the physical healing at the pools of Bethesda, or when Christ healed the blind man, you know, I once was blind but now I can see. Those physical healings are nevertheless part and parcel of the literature of the time. I don't think we would have a New Testament if it wasn't for the fact that Jesus was a charismatic healer and a bit of a hellfire and damnation preacher. That's the reality. If you take away the kinds of sermons that he said about the nature of heaven and hell, and if you take away the fact that he built his reputation on healings, then I don't think there's too much of the New Testament left apart from a nice set of guiding ethical principles. Now, have either of you got any comment that you'd like to make about that? And then afterwards I'll pick another question. So what do you think, for example, Dorothy?
Yeah, well, I think you're quite right. Great store has been placed through the writings of the New Testament on the things that Jesus could do that seem to be extraordinary. And I think there's always a place for the extraordinary to happen. Through whatever means, things come together to make something very special happen. And that can, and I'm sure it does happen to people. The thing that I have struggled with a little bit, and personally with, 27 years of chronic illness, is the path that puts you on if you get your hopes up too much. If you go to a service that may be a healing service and your hopes are up that there is going to be a miracle for you there tonight, dealing with the fallout of that can almost, in my experience, be worse than the day-to-day things you're dealing with. So for me, it's a balancing act. I don't doubt that special things can happen, and I'm sure back in Jesus' day they did. But it is not the ordinary commonplace thing, and we have to balance that out in our own lives.
Okay, thanks for that, Dorothy. A lot of words of wisdom there. Any comments from you, Barbara? Do you think Jesus was the sort of charismatic healer? That's what he built his reputation on.
Yes, I think so, David. And I once fell out the door and broke my arm, and they photographed it at the hospital, and they said, yes, there's the break in my arm. And I had to go back a week later. Now remember, all the time people were praying for me. And I think that's the secret in this modern age, for people to pray for you. And when I went back, they did another x-ray, and they said, you know, you never broke your arm at all. Look at it, it's all healed. Nothing wrong with it. They couldn't believe it at the hospital. And I know that God has healed me with it since. So I think to do, with prayer, doing exercise on whatever the joint might be, and it was marvellous. It's just, I just can't explain how great I felt to have it healed, because it's nothing like a broken arm.
Well, that's fair enough. If I broke my arm and it was healed, I'd feel very good indeed. Max has sent through another question, which I've just selected, and I think all of us could have a go at answering this. Max is asking, do we think it's possible that Jesus had superb medical knowledge and understanding that enabled him to heal in a way that appeared to others to be miraculous? I don't know. Have either of you got a comment about that? Did Jesus have superb medical knowledge?
Well, we know that God knows all things, and Jesus is, is his son. So I think he would have had a fair knowledge, but I can't really answer that question very well, I'm sorry.
No,
How
that's
about you? A difficult one for you, Dorothy.
Yes, it is a difficult one. That if all things are possible, then that's the thing we have to battle with, isn't it? Is whether we believe that all things can happen and that Jesus could do these things, or it's hard to put into words what might have been going on at that time. All we can be sure of is that there were extraordinary things happening.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you for that. That's an interesting perspective too. Now, Max, both Dorothy and Barbara have said that you've posed a difficult question. For me, I don't think Jesus had superb medical knowledge at all. I think he had the knowledge of the time. And I don't think that was superb medical knowledge like we've got superb medical knowledge today. Because if he had had the kind of superb medical knowledge that we've got, he would have applied that and talked about sort of some of the simple hygiene things. He would have talked about the need to take antibiotics. If he had that level of superb medical knowledge, he would have applied it. I think we can be quite sure of that. I think the reality is that Jesus simply had what was the common knowledge of the day, and the common knowledge of the day, which would have included some things about healing, is not the knowledge that we've got today. So how he appears miraculous is in terms of who he was in the context of his time. He was very definitely the miracle healer. He's not the only miracle healer that appears in the biblical literature. He's one amongst a number. And let's have a look at the next slide share, which asks us about a different kind of healing that Jesus does. Because I think this is where it starts to bring us to the heart of what it's all about. So this is the healing of the mind and the soul. And the story I've chosen from the Bible here is Christ heals a man who's called Legion, because legions of devils come out of him at Jesus' command. And these legions of devils are sent into the pigs, the swine, who then do a kind of a mad charge over the cliff and kill themselves. Now, this is a very different kind of story. I mean, where's this? Would you say that there's superb medical knowledge here? No, I don't think so. What I see is a story of that time and that place where people did believe in demon possession, and this demon possession carries on and on and on down the ages. And as Stuart Mannins pointed out after the service this morning, sometimes we even see sort of relics of it almost into our own time, where if you were born left-handed, that's sinister. Sinister means left-handed, but sinister in the sense of demon possession. That persists well into the 18th, 19th century. So no superb medical knowledge going on there. What do you make of this idea of Christ pushing demons out of one man into a herd of swine? Now that's a really hard one for lay preachers to get to grips with. Do you have any perspective on that?
I think it was a very dramatic thing to happen. And I think that's really quite scary, and it still is scary for us in these times, and we don't really understand it.
That's actually a really good answer, Barbara, because in terms of what we understand about disturbances in the soul or the psyche, we're still only, if you like, standing at the door. We haven't uncovered all of the things that happen deep within the recesses of our own soul or psyche. So I think that's a very reasonable answer. Any comments from you on it, Dorothy?
No, I just agree that, we don't know enough about what really makes us tick inside, right to the very heart of our being, to know even sometimes ourselves how we're going to react given a certain thing you might meet tomorrow. How are you going to react to something difficult that you've not met before, that you might meet tomorrow, that goes right to the inside of you? We just don't know enough about our humanness and how quickly the brain can almost change direction in terms of post-traumatic stress and things like that can trigger it. And I know my journey hasn't been easy. I've had a couple of significant meltdowns that happened very quickly, and yeah, it's just hard to put your finger on what's happening.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to get back onto a level playing field. So again, I see these stories as Jesus responding to need in the way he knew of the time.
Yep, I think that's a powerful thing to keep coming back to. Well, what we've done so far, we've actually done a highly theological exercise. We haven't got too far into the actual biblical texts, but we've been able to divide the Bible up into some categories where miracles take place in certain ways. So one of those categories is to do with the casting out of demons and the thing we call the healing of the soul. The previous one was about the physical healings, like the man born blind, and the other one was the miracles of nature. So you can see Jesus acting in different ways, and it seems to me that if lay preachers, who form the backbone of, most of the union cooperative ventures, many of the Methodist ventures, lay preachers have to get to grips with this, because miracles are not something that just crop up once in a while in the New Testament. They crop up time and time again. So we need some ways and some categories of how to think about them. And
one of the hardest things I think that I've had come up every now and then, and I want to go back to Barbara's broken arm and ask a question myself. The problem that we then have to deal with is, if there can be a healing through prayer, why does that not happen to everyone who's prayed for? And that becomes a real dilemma for the church and for those of us in a teaching position to handle.
Hey, great question, Dorothy. You're putting Barbara and me on the spot by asking that question. Can I just rephrase it to make sure I've understood it? If some people get healed by prayer, why not others? Is that the
That's
essence?
right. Why not everyone who's prayed for just as, strongly? And does it matter? Do you have to have 200 people praying for you? My question is, what makes the difference?
Okay. Do you want to go first, or will I, Barbara? It's sort of like we're going to rush like the swine off the edge of the cliff on this one. I'll throw it over to Barbara first.
Time and place, not prayers are answered. We know that. You might have to wait many years for a prayer to be answered. And we could be like Paul. He had to put up with his, problem that he had in his health, and that he was never healed from that.
Okay, that's a fair enough answer. No matter who's doing the praying, it doesn't, whether it's one person, 1,000 people, or 1 million people, it doesn't necessarily result in the outcome that might be expected or hoped for. So that causes us to think as preachers, whether lay or ordained, it causes us to think, are we teaching the right things about our understanding of prayer? But certainly it also causes us to think, are we teaching the right things about the miracles? Now, I'm just going to move my slide on to people other than Jesus who do the healing, because this, in fact, we've got the three categories in the Bible, in the New Testament and the Old Testament: nature miracles, physical healing miracles, mental or spiritual, soulful healings. Now, when we come to other people doing the healings, the big question is, did it happen? Does it happen today? And today's reading was about Simon the tanner has Peter lodging with him. He's come to Joppa, and Peter has performed a miracle on Dorcas. Dorcas means is the Greek word for prayer, that's sometimes called Tabitha. And Tabitha, according to the book of Acts, is dead, and Peter raises her from death. Now, this is a character other than Jesus, and Jesus says, well, whatever I can do, you can do. That raises the interesting question, down the ages, have people also claimed to be able to raise others from the dead? And I want to put to you the strange case of the healings in Timaru in 1960 at the New Life Centre. Now, the person that first alerted me to this was Reverend Dr. Brett Knowles, or Pastor Dr. Brett Knowles, who was a layperson who participated in the New Life Centre healing miracles in 1960. There was a visiting American evangelist, A.S. Worsley, and Worsley conducted a series of meetings, and Brett Knowles participated in these. Later on, Brett became the pastor of the New Life Centre, and then after that he's gone on, he's done a PhD in church history, and I think he teaches now in Australia, but he wrote a couple of papers and a thesis on the miracles in the Timaru New Life Centre in 1960. And amongst the miracles that were alleged to have happened were people who had bad teeth had their amalgams replaced with a much better silver mixture. A child had a leg that was lengthened. Someone was cured of goiter, and others allegedly were cured of their diabetes, and various other miracles were associated with A.S. Worsley. Now, I've been asking you guys, what do you believe about the New Testament miracles, etc.? Now I'm going to ask you the hard question. If you were a lay preacher in a different church, Anglican, Methodist, Presbyterian, whatever, in Timaru in 1960, would you believe A.S. Worsley and the healing miracles that were meant to have gone on? What a hard and difficult question to answer live on air. What would you have said as a lay preacher?
Well, I would have an open mind at that time, and I would possibly, believe that that could have happened, but I wouldn't get too hung up on it, because in that time we had a different view of things because I was younger then, and you're not really sure what to believe sometimes.
What a wise answer, Barbara. What a very wise answer indeed. Dorothy, what about you?
I think you have to be very careful, because you've also got to be very careful that you're not critical of how other people see their ministry. I think there's a sense that unless proved otherwise, you would be wanting to take things at face value as you saw or heard them at the time.
I'm going to take quite a different tack on that one, Dorothy. I'm going to try and be as wise as Barbara on this one. The miracles themselves became highly publicized, and it really worried different parts of the medical fraternity in Timaru in 1960. At that stage, New Zealand doctors belonged to I think the BMA, the British Medical Association. The Timaru branch refused to comment on it because I think they were worried about the pastoral implications, as Dorothy is suggesting. But other branches of the healing professions did comment, and the Dentists Association, New Zealand Dentists Association in Timaru, they started to look at the records that they had around these alleged bad amalgams being replaced, and they could not find substantial evidence for it. Now, my friend Brett Knowles, the pastor, said there was a dentist up in Auckland who tried to provide counter evidence for that and suggest that the miracles took place as recorded. But I think by and large the dental fraternity were not convinced that anything had happened. Another group that spoke out was the Timaru Optometrical Association. The optometrists were really concerned that the miracle healer was really saying to patients, throw away your medicine. And they actually issued a statement saying, look, if you suffer from glaucoma, don't stop taking the drops. So Worsley, in his alleged healing miracles, had really, I think, tried to recreate a biblical world that none of the rest of the world in Timaru any longer could understand, let alone participate in. And I think that's the prime mistake that goes on in most understandings of healing miracles. Now, the MP, the Reverend Clyde Carr, in 1960, he was a Presbyterian minister. He actually raises the issue, I think, in the House of Representatives, and he asks the Minister of Health to somehow stop what Clyde Carr called the quackery from going on. And so quite clearly the town of Timaru had become divided between the believers on the one hand and the non-believers, some of whom might be Christians, on the other hand. And that's the dilemma that I think anyone that wants to try and recreate the biblical world gets into in the 20th or 21st century. And this came to a head, I think, when A.S. Worsley actually said, if there are enough Christians in Timaru who demonstrate sufficient faith, I will be able to raise the dead. And of course, we've just read the passage about Dorcas in the book of Acts, or rather we read that this morning. So you can see the dilemma that I think all of us have got when we're talking about the biblical miracles. Whatever they were, and I'm not going to say 100% they didn't happen, and I'm not going to say 100% they did happen, but whatever went on is something that belonged to that era and that age and that time, and it can't be reproduced where we are today. Have either of you got any comments on that, or any of our viewers? We've had anywhere between 5 and 7 concurrent viewers flipping in and out. Any Q&A that you'd like to feed in, all of us would be delighted to handle. Any comments on what I've said? You may take a different point of view.
once you've got the medical profession stepping in like that, then it's a whole different scenario, as it did in Timaru. My answer was given from the point of view of thinking, now, if I was in the Methodist church down the road and I was a lay preacher at the time, as you sort of hinged that question, I'd have been very careful how I treated it with my congregation to prove either way could be consolidated. That was the way I answered the way I did.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfectly legitimate answer there, Dorothy. In fact, having done the little video on that, you can watch it. It's called Strange Miracles in Timaru. Just Google YouTube Strange Miracles in Timaru and it should come up. Having done the video, I then contacted a number of the ministers that had served in Timaru, and the Reverend Barry Jones provided this fascinating insight. Barry was a boy in the parsonage. His father, the Reverend Alan Jones, was the minister in Timaru, and it was his last year, I think, in 1960. He had been there 10 years. And Alan Jones was deeply disturbed by the miracle parade, if you like, that was going on with A.S. Worsley. And Barry, as a boy, can remember that his dad was deeply concerned for the pastoral implications of the people at the time. And that, in a curious kind of way, brings us back to, I think, Barbara, this is where you started from when we began out. You know, how do people feel about miracle? How do they feel about it, and not only in the biblical terms, but how do they feel about it today? And your answer, I think, was along the lines, well, if this is helping, then it has a place. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, and I think the medical profession back in the 1960s were a bit frightened. They had opposition. They may not have had so many people coming to them for advice on their health, and up here in Wellington they issued things in the papers about don't stop taking your medication if you've got this, that or that, you know. And I think today we are very curious about it, and also I think it could be a bit frightening for some people, and some people choose not to take any notice of it. And I think it's a personal thing. It's entirely up to yourself and what you're facing within your lives.
Yeah. That's a good answer too. I think it is very much what any one of us is facing at the very present time. So we've come to our last slide, and we've just gone a fraction over time, and it's miracles from a science perspective. What comments and questions do you have about scientific explanations of miracles? And maybe I could just summarize it by saying this, that I think that science and logic today hasn't in any way pushed miracle aside, but rather it's explained certain things. And those explanations are as miraculous as what people used to call miracle. And so as science explains more and more in today's world, the explanations can be absolutely incredible. They don't in any way take away from the sense of awe and wonder. So when I read that Christ healed Legion, or when I read that Christ healed the paralyzed man at Bethesda, or when I read that Peter raises Tabitha, I don't think it was from the dead, but I think that Peter raises Tabitha to new kinds of expectations, if you like, about a Christian life. All of these things are pointers to something deeper, and that something deeper explanations that happen in our day and age. So here's the first of them. Dorothy, from your perspective of 27 years, you know, with battling the illnesses, etc., I think it would be fair to say that though you've had to put up with far more than most people, there's a miracle in the modern medicine that's kept you going. Would you have any comment about that?
What's kept me going, I think, is having an anchored faith. Because more important to what's happening in my body is getting my head around what's happening in my head space. And yeah, the body it can at times just go away, and you know, having a leg amputated, I was pleased to get rid of the jolly thing. So there's a sense in which where science and knowledge fits in for me is that they now know, even with this condition, how they can halt it in the first 18 months. So that since I developed CRIPS, they now know a lot more. So for me, science and medicine and knowledge is a miracle in itself. It's a miracle what people have learned since Bible days, and it's just as big a miracle what we yet don't know and we have to find out.
Oh, so, I love it. That's the highlight of the video, Dorothy.
Science and knowledge and logic is two miracles. The miracle we've learnt over time till now, and it's almost a bigger miracle what we've yet got to find out.
Oh, I think that's wonderful, Dorothy. And I agree, because I shouldn't be here on earth, because I had to have a heart valve operation, because the other one was not very good at all. They only gave me 4 years left to live. And now here it is 13 years later, and I feel really great, and I really appreciate each day. And I think science and medical things go hand in hand, and they actually complement each other. And I've seen in my life how the medicines that we take these days is really complementary to whatever we've got in our lives, and we're able to enjoy life to the full.
Yeah, well, I'm past my used by date too, probably, Barbara, so maybe we're both sitting here a bit of a miracle in our own right. But I think for me it's all about God uses the means available, whether it be doctors, nurses, science, logic, to help with the need that we have in our daily lives, and that's probably sums it up for me.
Yeah, the reason why I asked both of you on tonight is because you've both got incredible faith stories to tell, and have told them live on air and in other circumstances where we've been involved. And it's that essence of my faith, how it has worked itself out in my life, that I think is the inspirational thing. The fact that you can both plug into the wonders of science, technology, etc., all the things that keep us going in one sense, that's the bonus on top of that fundamental attitude to life, which both of you exhibit in the most incredible way. Well, thank you very much to all our viewers. There have been quite a few coming in and out tonight, and I expect that this will go far and wide in the next few months. And thank you both very much to Dorothy and Barbara for coming in.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, David. Bye.
Bye.